Hi everyone! Today I went to a refugee cultural festival here in Munich and I got some information which I brought back home and I've been reading it through these leaflets. There were two stages with music, there were bands playing, there were some dance performances, and then there were these tables with all this information, and there was also one leaflet which I didn't take about dance courses for refugee women. And I asked about this. I was a bit curious and I asked why are they just for women? Are these women then supposed to be dancing together? Are they all lesbians? I asked, and the woman at the table told me that these dance courses are for refugee women, and they have been victims of male violence. And I don't really buy that, because these dance courses are obviously not just for refugee women but for foreign women in general, and of course not all of these have been victims of male violence. Fortunately, this is a clear case of sexism, I must say. And it says there were Bavarian folk dances and dances from different parts of the world. Afghanistan was mentioned and different other countries. And at least here in Europe, folk dance is a thing between a man and a woman. They dance as a couple. And that's why I asked this also about if women are then supposed to be dancing together. And I didn't really receive a clear answer to this. Now, Germany today is unfortunately a very sexist country. Men are discriminated in many areas, and the most well-known example, of course, is the quota system at companies, where companies have to have a certain amount of women, otherwise they may have problems in the at least among the managers. They have to be 30% women in the management, otherwise the company perhaps may be sentenced to pay fees, etc. And in Sweden, my home country, the situation is even worse. There is 50%. 50% of the managers at private companies have to be women, otherwise the state can dissolve the company. They have to close simply if they are not able to reach this goal of 50% women in the management. And of course this is crazy, because there are parts of the industry where there are very few women, where women simply don't apply because they're not interested in this kind of work. They study other things, they want to work with other things, which is only natural, of course. Men and women have different interests, and since they are different, they should be allowed to be different. But in this whole gender politics circus, they're not allowed to be what they really are, which is of course men and women. They are supposed to be one single sex, anonymous, and uncritical of obviously of the government, which means that they can be controlled, which of course is a threat towards democracy. So I see this very, very critically. Gender mainstreaming, of course, is since the late 90s one of the official aims of the European Union, which I find very problematic. And this is something that has to be talked about much more. A lot of women that you talk to nowadays support female quotas at companies. They have it also in Sweden, at least in the state, the public offices. They have it in the church, they have it everywhere, and they even have it at schools. In some cases also for men, actually. When I started high school many years ago, I received a plus on my grades because I chose a social sciences program at high school, and apparently a majority of those who applied were women, so I received a plus in my grades, which I also think is crazy. I think it's crazy to have such quotas for black people, for gay people, for physically or mentally inhibited people, for everyone, because everyone should be allowed to compete on their own terms. And if they are not allowed to compete on their own terms, they are patronized. And this is sexism, not only towards people who are not able to get a job because they are men in this case, and towards the other party as well, who are not allowed to compete on their own terms. I went around with my car this summer and visited different cities here in Bavaria for a week, which was a very nice experience. I saw a lot of the countryside, and I stopped somewhere to have something to eat, and then I happened to park on a parking lot which was reserved for female drivers. This may sound crazy, and it is crazy, but it's a fact that there are parking lots in Germany where only women are allowed to park their cars. So I wasn't allowed to park there, but I stayed on this spot. I didn't move my car. I guess it's just a rebel in me. And there was a sign on this parking lot on the ground, which was basically the same sign that you find at the door of a public toilet, the standard picture of a woman. And of course there were no such pictures of men on the ground, so there were no parts of the parking lot which were reserved for men, only for women. Which means that if the parking lot is full, women who come there can still park, because there are still these places on the parking lot which are reserved for women who drive cars. And of course this is the same thing as they had in South Africa a few decades ago, until a few decades ago, which was called apartheid. It's no difference at all. And this has to stop. It is degrading towards men and women and all other groups in society. And about the dance courses for refugee women, on which I was informed shortly today, the problem is not just that it's, of course, discriminating towards men, and these men are not German men, they are foreign men living in Germany, refugees or other foreign men. It's also working against integration, it's working in support of segregation and against an open liberal society where men and women are able to communicate on equal terms, which they are perfectly when dancing. That's why I think dancing is a very good way to learn about the liberal tradition and openness and equality of the sexes that we have here in Europe, and which we want to preserve, of course. But segregating refugees and other foreigners in this way, forbidding men to take part in dance courses, especially if they are going to learn Bavarian folk dance, where men and women are supposed to be dancing together. That's really crazy. This is supporting segregation, sexism, and homosexuality. It's not something that we want, it's not something that we should have. These were my thoughts about today's refugee culture festival. I was very disappointed. I didn't stay for very long. I really hope that this will change, but I have the feeling that it's getting worse and worse all the time. We don't have integration between Germans and foreigners, integration between men and women. We have segregation. We have segregation between Germans and foreigners. We have segregation between the sexes. And at the same time, we have a massive force in society trying to eradicate the differences between men and women and make them identical. Not equal opportunities, but identical. And this is a very negative development, which is completely against our democratic liberal tradition, and which I think with the time will lead to an abolishing of democracy, an abolishing of liberal freedoms, and it will lead to a new dictatorship, which makes it very, very dangerous, and it's something that we should all unite to fight against, and to fight for integration, equal opportunities, not equal outcome, equal opportunities, and a clear distinction between the sexes, where men are allowed to be men and women are allowed to be women, and where the polarity of the sexes, the differences, is celebrated and not destroyed, which will make for harmonious relationships, harmonious marriages, and happy families. And at the same time, this is a prerequisite for a sound and functioning society, and for democracy, and for freedom. If we don't have harmonious relationships and well-functioning families, there is no basis for democracy, because there are no mentally healthy and stable parents who are able to raise their children to embrace democratic values, liberalism and freedom. We won't have that anymore. We'll have just a mass of anonymous humans, no men, no women anymore, but just humans with one single sex, dressing the same, looking the same, behaving the same, thinking the same, feeling the same. There will be no tension between human beings, because there will be no men and women anymore. There will be no sexual tension, no sexual interest, and there will be no more individualism. Thank you for your attention, and I'll talk to you soon again.